something that I've had personally as a chair. Like in 1940, get a call.
Hello, everyone online as well.
Yeah.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, very good.
Great. Well, thank you all for being able to join. And I apologize again for the rescheduling of the meeting, but I am very grateful for all of your flexibility in being able to join this week instead. So much thanks. So I sent out the agenda this morning, and those of you in person, you also have the agenda as well. We're waiting on the attorney to join, so we might push the adoption of the bylaws and selection of chair and vice chair until after he's able to join. But before we do that, I did want to see if there was any motion to adopt the meetings from the minutes from the previous meeting in April, which were also shared with all of you this morning as well.
So moved.
And a second?
I was not part of that.
Yeah. Oh.
Should I-
Can someone who was here last month motion for second if you?
I'll second that. This is Bob Turner.
Thank you. And all in favor? Say aye.
All right.
All opposed? Okay, great. Well, then we can also move into introduction. Yeah, sorry.
Quick question. Do we have a quorum? Because did we move our board to 7?
Yes, there's
How
I
many?
think 4 people online.
Oh, there's 4 people online.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, great.
Okay.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I only saw 1 and so I was like.
Yeah, no, that
I
was
don't know
me
how we can-
too. I apologize.
And just so we have the proper, whatever rules, when people are online, we have to do a roll call vote. So we have to call out everybody's name and
Oh,
you have to vote so that we record it.
Oh, got it. Then can we do a roll call vote to adopt the minutes?
Sorry.
Of the previous meeting. We can start with the people in the room.
Yes.
I'm Kevin Connergood. I was not here in the April meeting, so I stayed.
I appreciate that. And then we have Bob Turner
Here, aye.
and Matt Fusco and Lena Richards.
I also am new to the subcommittee, and so I abstain as I was not present at the last meeting.
Thank you, Lena. Well, so our next. Oh, Allie. Hi, Allie. Thank you for joining as well.
Hi, yes, I agree to adopt the minutes from last meeting. I was there
Perfect.
virtually.
We can now go into our general roll call. As you are now well aware, we also have 2 additional members to the subcommittee. So Kevin and Lena, I'd love for you guys to introduce yourselves to the group, and we will also have everyone else introduce themselves as well, since I know they are new to you.
I'm Kevin Connergood, a new member to the Parks and Rec Advisory Board, and excited to help out any way I can.
Lena?
Lena Richards, thank you for having me. I'm currently a Parks and Rec and Greenways Advisory Council member, and I represent the Inca Candler District. So glad to be here.
Great. And then Anne, if you could introduce yourself. We're gonna have everyone.
Oh, okay. Ann Babcock, and I'm on the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board.
Bob?
I'm sorry, did you just say,
We're just asking everyone to introduce themselves.
Yeah.
We have 2 new members of the subcommittee.
okay, so you just called my name. I wasn't sure when but
Yes.
I'm Bob Turner anyway, and I serve on the Land Conservation Advisory Board. I'm glad to be here.
Matt?
Yeah, hi, this is Matt Fusco. I'm a landscape architect and also serve on the Land Conservation.
And Al.
Allie Howell, Buncombe County Parks and Rec Advisory Board, and happy to be here.
Hi. And we now have Bob Gale as well. We were just doing introduction. So
I was at a conference. I'm jumping in on this and then I have to go back.
Oh.
Sorry, I'm late.
Well, thank you for joining. So we have two new members of the subcommittee, Kevin and Lena, and so everyone was doing introductions. And we actually just finished, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Okay. Bob Gale, ecologist and public lands director with Mountain True, nonprofit. I'm on the Land Conservation Advisory Board. I remember that.
Thank you so much. And then I have met all of you now, but I am the open space bond manager. My name is Joel Carter. I joined the county back in February, and I'm serving as the secretary for this month.
I'm Thomas Gold. I'm the principal park planner at Washington County Recreation Services. Glad to be here.
I'm Allison Daines, Director for Buncombe County Parks and Recreation, and excited to be here as well.
I'm not excited to be here. No, I'm just kidding. I'm so super thankful that you are all joining us today. I'm Jennifer Harrison, and I am the Agriculture and Land Resources Director.
Well, thank you all for being here. As I mentioned, our agenda has the next item being the adoption of the bylaws. We're just waiting on the attorney to join, and once he does, we'll be able to go into that. So I can actually, if it's okay with this committee, I can jump forward to the presentation. Oh, actually, perfect timing.
Sorry about that.
Got to the adoption of bylaws.
Oh, I'm right in time.
You are right on time. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Michael Frew, one of the attorneys here. Sorry, I was at a commission budget retreat. Here I am.
So we just finished the introductions, and the next item on the agenda is for the adoption of the bylaws.
Okay, I know that you shared the draft bylaws with the group a couple months ago. Any questions? Do you want to go over any of it?
I have a question.
You don't get a vote.
With such a small board, do we have to do the second? Can we do a vote and then just take roll call? And would you prefer a second?
You're not required to have a second. It's just up to the board. It's usually a second when you have a larger body making decisions, but if you're small enough, you feel that any opinion is worth bringing up for a vote, then you could change that to say, you don't need a second.
Just throwing it out there.
I don't find the second to be all that burdensome.
I don't either.
I don't either. It's okay with me.
So leave it.
I have a question.
Yes.
And regarding the chair and the vice chair, I'm just wondering, since we've got representatives from both the land conservation community and the recreation community, would it be relevant to suggest that maybe one of the officers come from each of those two areas of representation?
That's completely up to the board. I mean, I think that would be a good way to do it.
Then the question is, do you want that in the bylaws as a requirement? Is that where it would go? Like
Well, I mean, what I would always advise any board is that you really can't find future boards. I mean, each board needs to have its own opinion and its own way of doing business. So if this board chooses to go that route, I think it'd be fine.
But it doesn't need to be in the bylaws.
Just bear in mind, we could put it in the bylaws, but then next year it could be pulled out of the bylaws. It probably wouldn't be, because the makeup of the board is sort of predetermined. But your choice.
Just was thinking for, representation purposes and fairness of representation. That was my thought.
Okay. So I think in that case, it'd be, if you want to make a motion to that effect, then to include that into the bylaws, I could make that change and bring it back at the next meeting.
I think colloquially we could handle that
Without putting it in the
without putting
bylaws.
it in the bylaws.
Just a suggestion.
I think it's valid.
Any other questions or thoughts regarding the bylaws?
Oh, we got two online. Okay.
The four.
So if there's no questions, it'd just be any member of the board can make a motion to approve the bylaws.
I make a motion to approve the bylaws.
Second.
Say all in favor.
We have to do a roll call because we have people online.
Don't have to anymore.
Oh, we don't?
The rule's gone with the demise of the declaration of state of emergency.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Nina, I think is trying to vote.
Just trying to.
Aye. Delayed reaction, slow internet.
Great. So with that, then our next item on the agenda is actually the selection of the chair and the vice chair. Is there?
There's no trick to this. It's just to nominate yourself or nominate someone else to be chair. I think we should just start with that.
If there's no other takers, I am up for the challenge of being the chair of the subcommittee.
I'm sorry, who was that? Is that somebody from Land LCAB or from Parks and Rec?
This is Kevin Conricode from the Parks and Rec Advisory Board.
Okay. And so, Bob, we are the only two from LCAB?
And Matt is also.
Okay.
I'd like to nominate you or one of you as vice chair. Being that I'm retiring in a month and I'm going to have a big change in my life and starting a side business, I don't feel like I would want to commit to that, but I will be at the meetings.
I was gonna suggest you, Bob, go on.
Well, I'm not sure responsibilities come with it or a lot of time commitment is required with this position. Is that something that would require a lot of time? Can someone answer that? Additional time other than these meetings?
It shouldn't.
Yeah, it should just be
Jill
attendance
will
at the
doing
meeting.
most of the heavy lifting.
Yeah.
I'd be okay with being vice.
Matthew, you want to do it?
Sure.
Okay.
Good.
Great.
I second.
So I think we have a nominee for chair and a nominee for vice chair. If everyone's happy with that, with no further nominations, as soon to be chair, do you want to just call the question?
Call it into all in favor of the current chair and vice chair. Say aye.
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 Congratulations.
As someone who's served in some of these positions various times in my life, I love seeing younger people stepping up doing it instead of older people doing it again.
So Kevin and Matt, I will also connect with you separately about just kind of your responsibilities as chair and vice chair, which as Michael Frew said is mostly just leading these meetings, but look out for that correspondence.
Excellent.
Thank you both for.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you, Frew. Appreciate it.
Sure.
You're welcome to stay if you want to, but you also don't have to since you just need to.
Our work here is done.
Thank you.
Feel free to call if you ever have any questions.
Okay,
It's just on
so
the computer. So this is what's on the screen.
do I need to do?
Just say got it when you start presenting your.
So the next item on the agenda is a quick presentation. As we discussed at the last meeting, and I know Kevin and Lena, the two of you are not here, we are treating the open space bond as kind of 3 application processes for the 3 project types, being passive recreation lands, greenways, and conservation easements. And for each of those project types, we are developing evaluation criteria. So I wanted to take a little bit of time today to just give an update on where things stand with the bond. generally, where we are in the process for passive recreation land specifically, and what that process is going to look like. And then finally, we also wanted to share some initial thinking around evaluation criteria and kind of vision setting for passive recreation lands as well. For the update itself, as I mentioned, we are in the process of developing these evaluation criteria for the 3 components of the bond. Conservation easement evaluation criteria was actually adopted this past week. So we are now able to move forward into project selection this summer for conservation easements. For greenways, we have just wrapped up a public input process on the greenways criteria, and the Recreation Advisory Board has approved the final set of criteria for that component. And we will be going to the commissioners for adoption in June, which then we will be able to move towards pre-development for the 2 shovel-ready projects. And then finally, for passive recreation, we are getting into this criteria development process and public engagement process that I will talk to more momentarily. And we anticipate that we'll be able to go to the commissioners for adoption in August, and ideally open the application window for project proposals this fall. In addition to that progress on the evaluation criteria, we have also convened all of the advisory boards for the bond, including this one. As you may know, the bond also includes a community oversight committee that provides oversight for both the open space and the affordable housing bonds. And we have completed orientations for those members, and they will be having their first meeting in late June. And then finally, as I mentioned, we have this public engagement process that is also taking place. Please feel free to pause me if you have any questions, by the way. So what does this evaluation criteria process for passive recreation look like? For those of you on the Recreation Advisory Board, a lot of this feels similar because we just completed this process for the greenways criteria. But for passive recreation, we're actually extending this public engagement process a bit because passive recreation is a very new project type in Buncombe County. And we want to get a sense of what the community actually wants these projects to look like. What kind of characteristics of a good project are desired, and really set those visions for passive recreation. And so in order to be able to do that goal setting, we wanted to have a bit of a longer runway for thinking through the evaluation criteria for passive recreation. In April, our staff had some great internal conversations around passive recreation. What are some of the key considerations? And we did identify a list of kind of top level criteria or values even that we're looking for in passive recreation projects. These I'm going to share momentarily, but they're very much so draft criteria. They're really to help guide these conversations with this board, with the stakeholders, and with the public. This month, we are obviously meeting today, and we're going to share those kind of top level criteria with you. We are also meeting with stakeholders and the public to have this public engagement process around vision setting. And then tentatively, we anticipate that we will be able to go back and build out the evaluation criteria based on these conversations. Yes.
Are the people online seeing your slides, or are they seeing only the?
That's a great question. Online, can you guys see the slides, or is it still on the first slide?
It's on the first one.
I am so sorry. I don't, okay, one moment. I apologize. Thank you for catching that, Jennifer. Okay. Now can you see criteria development process?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
I apologize for that. But the previous slide was just an update on the open space bond. This is the evaluation criteria process. But as I was saying, we anticipate that in June, we will be able to revise and build out that evaluation criteria based on the conversations that we'll be having this month. And then we will share that refreshed set of criteria with this group as well as with the stakeholders and solicit additional feedback and input. And then in July, we will hopefully be able to come to this committee with a final set of criteria for review and approval. And then tentatively in August, taking that criteria to the commission for adoption. As I mentioned, we wanted to share those kind of initial top level criteria with you today so that we can start thinking about what do we want these projects to look like? What kind of projects do we want to see come forward? What are the things that we are valuing in passive recreation? But before we think about potential criteria or potential values, it's important to put boundaries around what we're talking about. Because passive recreation, as you guys I'm sure have encountered, is a very new term to people in this county, and a lot of people are coming to us asking, what is passive recreation? So this is the definition that we shared in the last meeting, but I wanted to bring it back. Passive recreation lands is land, outdoor space, water bodies, and corridors where passive recreational activities place minimal stress on a site's resources in a designated area. We're really thinking of these projects as kind of a combination between conservation and recreation. Most of these will have conservation easements on them that protect the natural resources and provide these ecosystem services, but they're also going to be open to the public for these recreation activities. Now, what passive recreation is not is these activities that require a lot more structured facilities and infrastructure. They tend to be more group activities, things like group sports that would require a baseball field or a soccer field or something. That those types of infrastructure tend to be more harmful to the natural resources. They require you to tear down trees or other plants to put in these types of infrastructure. That is not passive recreation. These passive recreation lands include activities that are more like hiking or photography or fishing. So with that definition as our basis, the staff came up with these top level, we're going to think of them as values or characteristics of good passive recreation land projects. These are obviously very vague. We don't go into a lot of details on these, and that's intentional because we want these conversations with this board and the public to guide what the criteria look like. And it's very likely that additional criteria will be added. But just to walk through these, the first is accessibility. So making sure that these projects are accessible by all in Buncombe County. Equity, being equitable, both in terms of how the bond funds are allocated, but also in who benefits from these projects. Alignment with county plans and needs. We want to make sure that these are part of a larger goal and a larger strategy for open space in Buncombe County. So this could be alignment with something like the comprehensive plan that was just feasibility, both within the time frame of the bond, but also ensuring that these projects are something that can get done. Costs and leveraging of funds, so both keeping costs low, or spending the dollars efficiently rather, but also making sure that we're tapping all available sources of funding. And then finally, what is the conservation and environmental impact of these lands? So again, these are not the set criteria, they are draft criteria meant to spark conversation and discussion. But my last point is on next steps and where we're going with these. So I want to pause and see if you guys have any initial thoughts or questions. Knowing that you're just now seeing these, we want you guys to have time to mull them over, think about your thoughts.
I have a thought or a comment on the accessibility. As from my work, when I think of accessibility, that includes ADA accessibility and those types of things. And I think in this context, it sounds like maybe accessibility is people being able to get to that piece of property or that passive recreation land. I don't know if it's worth having a little bit more detail. Obviously, there would be an accessibility component if there was a design or plan implemented on the land, but maybe some clarification on those two items. And I guess, does accessibility also include proximity to existing infrastructure? Say there's a greenway and, you know, that criteria might be that within a quarter mile of the greenway gets a higher level of consideration than say maybe something that is 1.5 miles and doesn't have a greenway that might be planned in the near future to that location.
I think these are all great nuances that we're trying to hash
Sure.
out in these conversations. So thank you, Matt.
Yep.
Yeah, I just had a question of how the county does things. I work a lot with the U.S. Forest Service, or have in the past, and when they give a contract out for somebody to do some work, like, you know, create and in this case, an entrance to a path or something, I don't know what, but the Forest Service and federal government has to always go with the lowest contractor, lowest bid. Does the county have a requirement like that? Or, I mean, you know, that sometimes leads to a poor contractor. So that's where I'm going. Is it possible to, you know, get the one that?
Well, let me speak there first, Bob. That's a challenge that the Forest Service chooses not to overcome, because they can write into their contracts that they will not accept a low bid. But they have to be diligent about pursuing that. But I agree with your point there. It definitely needs to be something that we, or maybe would have the flexibility to write into any design criteria that based on performance of previous projects or something like that, that the projects can be selected without actually having to select the low bidder.
Right, yeah, you hit the point. That as long as I was just curious as there was a way to kind of put a little quality.
I agree 100%.
And the answer is yes. And I don't know if Michael Frew is still on here, but statutes allow us to go with responsible bidder. So responsible and responsive can be defined, you know, in other terms, beyond just cost.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Under equity, would that also include geographic distribution? Because I know those are areas that the county has been looking at for providing recreation opportunities to all corners of the county.
I think it can. I know in our greenways criteria process, that was one of the things that came up in that equity component, was wanting to be equitable with regards to like where projects are distributed in the county. So it's definitely, again, these are the high level concepts, and we want to have these conversations to hash out what exactly is included, not only in these, but what other criteria or values are missing from this. And I think that geographic distribution is a good one.
This might be a good time just to mention the master plan that you're putting together and how that might help influence, because I'm not sure LCAP people
Are aware of the agreement.
yeah.
Thomas, do you want to talk to it?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it last meeting, but we do have a Parks and Rec system-wide master plan that we're kicking off soon. We're in the process of contract negotiations currently with a design firm that's going to be helping us with that. It is going to be, they've scoped out, I believe, a 12-month process. I expect with our kind of public engagement process, that it's actually going to be much longer than that. So I wouldn't expect any kind of, you know, stamped approved system-wide master plan for 16 months out. So, or I should say 18 months out, sorry, a year and a half.
The other thing is that the system-wide recreation master plan, there is a greenway master plan that was done years ago and is I think in need of updating, and we believe that our master planning process will show the need for the updating of that plan, and for that plan to also look at potentially including open space, passive recreation type lands, as well as trails. And so we'll see for sure what comes out of that, but that's what we're anticipating, that greenway plan becomes a more comprehensive Buncombe County open space, trails and greenways master plan.
And I should mention too, that we're also like not looking only within like the kind of system-wide equitable component that you mentioned, and we're not only looking within like our own system, but there are many different park systems that exist within Buncombe County. So when we're talking about equitable distribution of these programs and resources, we're looking outside of our system as well to see if, you know, certain geographic regions of the county have opportunities that are outside of our system and taking that into account as well. So.
Would it be helpful if this group ever hears from the developer of the comprehensive plan to see where recreation fits into that larger, I mean, just as sort of an information providing body?
Definitely, I can certainly invite him to join.
The comp plan is set to be adopted
May 16th, the next
Yeah,
one.
so
Yeah, I knew that it was.
Yeah,
ready to
so it'd
go,
be good
so
to-
it'd be good to have some type of presentation.
It's a great suggestion.
Any other thoughts or questions? Again, you guys will have plenty of time between now and when we're going to be revising these or building out the criteria generally. So I want all of you to have time to think about these, think about passive recreation generally, and be able to come up with your thoughts and opinions. But I do want to just open the floor if there's any other thoughts or questions in this moment. Seeing none.
I think there's the other thing to mention on the equity piece is that it's equity across multitude of evaluation criteria. So it could be ability.
Socioeconomic.
Yeah. So we're thinking when just the broad statement of equity is put in there, the thought is that we give a considerable deep dive into not just thinking about equity on a single plane, but on a multi-dimensional level that can be difficult to really get at when you layer all of those things together. But equity is a chief component of Buncombe County's mission and vision. And so we want to build that into everything that we're doing. And so while all of these are negotiable, I think equity is one of those that really helps anchor this work.
Thank you, Jennifer. And then finally, next steps. Sorry. So as I mentioned, we are going to be starting a public engagement process where we want to use that to set the vision for passive recreation to be funded by this bond. And up here, I have some of the questions that we're going to use to guide these conversations. We want to get a sense of what the public wants passive recreation to look like. What are these characteristics or values of good passive recreation projects? And then how does that larger vision impact the criteria and how the criteria should be adapted to prioritize that goal? And the first step of this public engagement process is we are going to be having a meeting with the stakeholders tomorrow night. The details are up there, but as I mentioned earlier, this is going to include individuals from land trust, the different municipalities within Buncombe County. There's going to be some advocacy groups there as well. May 15th, we're going to have a public meeting to discuss the same questions, and that'll be at Skyland South Buncombe Library. And then throughout this entire process, we have an online public input survey that we're going to be launching tomorrow with the stakeholder meeting. And that will be shared at these meetings, but it also be shared more broadly, and anyone who wants to participate in that survey can do so. And in addition to these questions, those initial top level criteria that I just shared are going to be used to help guide these conversations and spark ideas amongst participants of what are some values that are missing from this list, or how do we need to further drill into these if we're going to keep that list, and so on. And though that is the end of my presentation, but I wanted to ask if there were any other questions or thoughts about the bond generally, about passive rec, and kind of the next steps for this criteria development.
Are you going to weight it like you did with the greenways? So you'll have some that are specific that have to be met and then the weighted.
Yes. So for those of you who are not in the Recreation Advisory Board, for greenways, the criteria has different weights, and the final weights of those criteria came from the public engagement process, where we had the public kind of rank the criteria in order of priority. And there's also both the weighted criteria and there's eligibility criteria. So they have to kind of meet those eligibility criteria to even be able to move forward. And then those that do move forward are scored based on those weighted criteria. And we do intend to do a similar weighting and eligibility criteria process for passive recreation as well. And,
I have a question. So we have funds from the open space bond for about 10 million. Is that correct? That's what we'll be managing? Is that accurate?
so it's not completely delineated so that it's 10 for each component, but it'll be about 10. We're trying to leave it flexible just based on what project proposals come forward, but about 10, yes.
What do you anticipate these projects to look like? For instance, are we going to be looking to purchase land? You mentioned that some of these proposals we'll be looking at, many will perhaps already have conservation easements on the land. So what kind of proposals do you see us looking at in the future? How will we be using these funds, do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's one that we've talked about as a team a lot as well. Right now, we anticipate that we'll have both will be eligible. So both projects that would ask the county to purchase and own the project would be eligible, as well as if another municipality had a passive recreation project and they needed more funding to complete it, that would also be eligible to apply. We want to use this public engagement process to get a sense of kind of what the preference is and what the priority is, understanding that obviously purchasing land and projects typically requires more funding. So that might mean there's a smaller number of projects that get funded if we do a lot of those versus funding part of improvements on a project is a different dollar ask. But we want to get an understanding of what the stakeholders and the public prefer in that sense. And also with the stakeholders especially, we want to use tomorrow night to also ask them, is there an appetite for, say, a land trust owning and running this project in the long term versus if they are just looking for the county to take it over. We want to hear from them if that's even an option and what that looks like.
Right. So we're not necessarily looking to own all this land.
Not necessarily, no.
We may be helping somebody with a conservation easement, perhaps, right? Somebody putting land into conservation under terms that would allow the public to use that land, maybe, perhaps. Is that?
Right. And so there is an overlap to that point. There's going to be some overlap between, for example, the conservation easements component of the bond and this component of the bond. And part of the staff's job is going to be helping guide potential projects of, where they might better fit in applying for funds. If there is a project that comes forward that has a conservation easement, but is also wanting to have trails on it that are open to the public, like we might advise them that they should apply for passive recreation funds versus another project might be better fit for the conservation component of the bond. But yes, we are not, for passive recreation, we are not looking at it as it's required that the county would own the land.
I want to throw something out there because I think it's important. I recognize I'm not like a member of the board or anything like that, but it's something that I just realized was missing from our kind of initial criteria there, but I think it's super important. And I think, and Bob Turner might have been hinting at it a little bit here, but I think like a land management plan associated with the projects is also like really important in terms of, because a lot of people view these projects as kind of low maintenance projects, and they are lower than your high maintenance kind of turf fields and stuff like that, but there is still quite a bit of of management that needs to go on when you're talking about these projects. So throwing that out there as well.
Yeah, that's one of my thoughts. I was getting ready. A question was developing in my own mind, because there is, I mean, I'm all for protected lands and nothing done to them, but I'm a wild botanist and all of that. But there are situations, because we've altered our landscape so much, you know, we have invasive plants that come in. And it would be horrible to just let them continue to spread and run around when control's needed. And so, and there's issues of how you control those, and that some people might be for some might not. But anyway, that would be addressed later down the road as part of the land management plan, I would hope.
And so the ability of the organization that's applying to the grant to maintain the lands, I think, is a pretty important criteria for the grant.
Right.
And or our ability to maintain it if it's something that we own.
Right.
Jill, is this going to be an evolving grant application process? Is it a one time in the fall, or is it going to be ongoing? How until funds are used up, how is that going to
So we anticipate that there will probably be multiple application windows. For passive recreation lands, and this is different from how conservation is typically done for those of you on the LCAP, but we are going to have an opening and a closing for the application window. So there will be a deadline. And then after that deadline, we will go through the project review and selection process. But it's very likely that, you know, there might not be enough good projects that come in this first application window that we want to spend all of the funding right away. So if that's the case, then we will look to open a second application window later on.
Or maybe any of the funding.
Yeah.
If we don't get quality projects, we might not, you know, you might not vote to approve any of them.
And that is definitely an option. We want to make sure that this funding is going towards good projects. So
And that's kind of the whole point of the selection criteria, right? If things score really low.
And it's also the point of the flexibility between 10 million per tranche.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So any last questions or thoughts? Okay. So before we move towards the public comment and adjournment, I did just want to take an administrative moment around the next meeting while I have you all here. Currently looking at possibly doing the same time on June 6th, which is a Tuesday. If that does not align with your schedule, please let me know. And if we're not going to have a quorum, I can look at other dates as well. But so Tuesday, June 6th at noon is the current proposed time for the next meeting.
Okay.
Great. Then we can open if there's anyone from the public online or in person who would like to comment. Is there anyone online?
Let me just double check. I did not see anyone, but it doesn't look like.
Okay. Great. Then is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor? Great. Thank you, everybody. And I'll send out the meeting minutes and the invitation for the next meeting.
I'm sorry, did you suggest a time for that June 6th meeting?
I proposed noon, 12
Noon,
Yeah.
okay, all right.
Is there any chance we could do a little, I've got to drive that afternoon for a grandchild's graduation the next day
Okay.
in South Carolina.
So you're thinking earlier?
Is that possible?
I'll check the staff schedule, but I know my schedule is fairly flexible that day. So that would work for me as the secretary if it works for the group as well.
Morning works for me.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm free that day.
Okay. Great. Then yeah, I'll propose an earlier time for a staff meeting.
And partying.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, everyone.
We need a motion to adjourn.
We did it.
I missed it. I got so caught up in the graduation, I got all excited.